Hi everyone, my name is Jocelyn Kaza with Everbridge and welcome to the webinar today. This is part 2 of our 3-part series on active shooter preparedness. If you haven't registered for part 3, we'll tell you how to do so at the end of the session today. I do have a little housekeeping before we begin. We'll be recording the session and making it available on demand after today. The slides will also be available for download. You'll get an email within 24 hours with the recording and slides. Also, we'll be accepting audience questions and we'll try to answer a few of them at the end of the session. So please feel free to submit your questions as you think of them. All right, today I'd like to introduce our speakers. Matt Schmid, Senior Manager of Solution Marketing at Everbridge, and Sean McDevitt, Director of Sales Engineering at Everbridge. All right, let's jump into the presentation. Matt, take it away.
Okay. All right, welcome everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about how you can operationalize technology in the context of before, during, and after an active shooter, active assailant scenario. You may hear me interchange those two terms. They're really the same thing. After I'm finished, my colleague Sean McDevitt again will bring you through an actual technology demo where you'll really be able to see how technology can get you and your people through these critical events safely. But we'll talk about a wide range of those technologies as well today. So many of you on the call may be aware, as Jocelyn was saying, this is a 3-part active shooter preparedness series from Everbridge. Part 1 was roughly a week ago when Steve Cremando walked us through understanding the human element of active shooter scenarios. He spoke of trends, the psychology of these events, the role of mental health, and the interesting notion of staying what he called left of bang in any critical event. That's an interesting comment. I think it's a title of a book as well too. From the little diagram you see, he focuses on preparedness, response, and recovery, which closely aligns with our discussion today. That's why I wanted to mention it on the role technology can play and frankly should be playing in your organization. So yes, we're on now part 2. So on with the show, we did a study with Forrester just a couple of years ago, and we asked organizations what kind of events or critical events they had suffered in the past 24 months. And it really was quite astonishing how many organizations face an active shooter or an active assailant. So 11% of organizations answered affirmatively, and that's just a shocking number. So I hope to see an update on that study soon to see where that trend and kind of what it looks like today. But when we think about those situations and those active shooter incidents, they're also very expensive to our organization. Obviously, the loss of life is our #1 concern, right? And preventing injuries. But it also is a big impact to an organization in terms of direct dollar costs and indirect costs. And these continue long after the shooter incident itself. These get into things like required upgrades to your safety and security systems. There's probably going to be some programs you need to put in place for your own staff or contractors to help them get through the trauma of that incident. There's going to be lots of lawsuits, happens all the time. And we can expect legal costs, right? Costs of retaining camera data, other information that may be required from either regulatory agencies or associated lawsuits. That's going to have costs. You're going to have costs in terms of communication, PR firms, internal and external, all of those constituencies, including the public that you're going to face as well. There's going to be a lot of operational impacts. And we all know of recent incidents that some have been in national attention, some have not, but they're still important. For the Virginia Tech shooting as an example that happened a number of years ago, that cost is estimated at $48 million and is still likely going on. And again, those impacts last long after the actual incident itself, of course. So we often talk about critical events and we wonder, why is this so difficult to manage? Again, in the first part of the series, Steve Cremando talked about the human element that is a big factor in all this. And when some of these events are occurring, the trauma of them in the moment, the panic, but there is a lot more to that than just the human element of the moment. We really want to think about for our own teams how we can do better, right? And the challenges that organizations often face are really understanding what is going on when the active shooter incident occurs. Is the information coming in truly a reliable source? People need to know what kind of weapons are involved. Are there automatic weapons? Is there a knife? Is it something else? Where is it taking place? How long ago? How severe is it? Is there more than one person? Or is it just a lone actor? And in this kind of incident, of course, we should care about that's not necessarily true that every critical event, because a lot of times it's unclear whether this is truly affecting our organization, or is the information so vague that it's somewhere across town? That's something you really need to figure out. And unless you have a good source of information, that can be hard to understand in the moment. But there are a lot of impacts potentially to your organization, your people directly affected. It could also be some of your key business partners. So what we need to do and how we need to respond, we need to take some of those manual processes off the table. A lot of organizations have processes that are what I'll call loosely digital. Perhaps they could be in binders, and that's like horrible, but they're more likely on something like SharePoint these days, right? Which is not that much easier to execute if those assets are unable to be located quickly. And while I'm sure a lot of you today may drill for such things, it's not remarkable to say that those plans sometimes need to be activated in a quicker fashion. For something like an active shooter incident, you can't spend the time to get that, right? You have to be able to kick off those plans really quickly. So that's a challenge a lot of organizations have. And then after the incident, it's often challenging to analyze performance. That takes time. So do you have systems that are actually capturing some of that information? So those are all challenges that organizations have in the moment or when they're trying to execute a post-action response. So what we do know though is that the quicker we can respond usually means the greater the impact of the response, or where we can help prevent more loss of life and help prevent more injuries, resolve the situation more quickly, protect our people, protect our assets, and keep our operations running. With any of these events, the sooner you can deal with the situation, the more likely you're able to minimize its impact on your organization. So shifting back over to part one of the series again, Steve talked a lot about Lewin's equation, and you can go back into that and he'll give you all the detail on that and you can find information. But how this affects our response, and even prior to the actual incident, how this affects people's behavior. And I do want to highlight what we're seeing and what Steve talked about. You know, this is, of course, a real challenge as we get into the hybrid work environment. It really is a lot more difficult when we don't know where people are that we're responsible for protecting. And that brings us to this notion of work in motion or the hybrid workforce. And what you're seeing here actually looks a lot like my calendar this week and next week. Earlier this week, I was in our Chicago office. Today, I'm in a remote location at my home office. Friday, I'm traveling. And you're going to have salespeople and technicians in the field at customer locations or even working alone, as you see here. Your employees could simply be at a different location on campus or traveling all over and exposed to an infinite number of possible situations and outcomes. So in my case, my organization needs to know where I am if it's going to better protect me. But I'll get back to this location piece in a minute. And let's just step away from our active shooter discussion just for a second and think about all these folks we're looking at here. across our hybrid workforce. What are some of the risks and the challenges within those when we think about critical events? Situation might be very different from the friendly confines of my home office here, your home office, but the situation is then compounded when people are traveling. This is easy to imagine when they're in a place or environment that's new to them. They don't know their way around. They don't really know what's going on in these new locations. And that just kind of ups the ante and makes it more important that the organization has tools and has a way to protect its people based on where they are and knowing what's going on around their people in those places. In the moment, uh, my colleague Sean again will show you just how that might play out. Critical event management systems like Everbridge ensure people are prepared for their day, no matter how it unfolds, no matter where their day begins and ends, at the office, at home, or remote, on the road, or in the field. And when a threat event like an active shooter unfolds, you'll know the locations of your affected workforce and establish communications with them to keep them out of harm's way. So just how big is this challenge? There are several notable studies on this. As you can imagine, this is really very dependent on the industry. If you're in manufacturing, you're not likely to be someone who's remote. You probably never were, even in the pandemic. But for a lot of office type jobs, you can work remotely, and I work remotely at least half the time, sometimes more. And sure, a lot of my colleagues are in that same model. But there's some organizations, and you've probably heard a few of their names that have gone 100% remote. No more offices. We're just going to have meeting spaces and that you can get together in and collaborate. But more often we're seeing a hybrid model, and that's kind of this mix of part-time at home work. And 74% of companies have said that's going to be their model going forward. Among the populations of workers, though, that what we've seen are people who are fully nomadic, so-called digital nomads. Those are really about the hardest folks to protect. And there are a lot of them, and they're growing, and they have traditional office type jobs. I mean, I could probably work from anywhere if I wanted to. And that's a phrase you'll see, work from anywhere, now more than you'll probably hear work from home. Anywhere could be on a houseboat, it could be in another country. You hear a lot of people going to these nice, warm, sunny places and working from there for a few months that might be more attractive a few months down the road for me here in Chicago. So this is an area that's tremendously difficult for companies to do their duty of care when they don't even know where their people are, typically. So this is going to get even bigger. Already about 15 million people, and we expect that trend to continue over time in this digital nomad kind of category. So again, this ups the ante and means that we just have more work to do to protect those people that are outside of our traditional walls. And we've now got to do some more work. So fortunately, we do have a lot of technology that can help across this before, during, and after. This is typically a framework we like to use to help us assess, locate, act, and analyze. What does that mean? Always know what's happening or may happen soon. Always be able to automatically identify what and who's impacted, who needs to know, and who can help. Be ready to inform, communicate with, collaborate to mitigate the risk or accelerate the incident's resolution. And then automatically collect necessary data about the incident to comply with regulations and to improve your response process and your effectiveness over time for all of it. So this is how we could think of that life cycle. And technology can absolutely play a role in all of these places. It could help in the planning, preparation, and prevention. And again, back in part one, Steve talked about a few of those things like SOPs and evacuation plans. So have you reviewed those plans since the pandemic, since way before the pandemic? since you started a hybrid work model across your organization, if you haven't, it's probably time to take a look at those. We need to understand our partners, the assets that we have at our disposal for response, as well as know who is responsible for those assets. We need to know additional response resources. We need to make sure we have communication plans. We need to accommodate people who may not be mobile or have other physical needs or emotional needs that we need to take special care of in an active shooter situation. And then this is the really important part of PrEP, is those employee resources, the mental health and wellness benefits that many organizations provide and are making really, really accessible to organizations. So many organizations have mobile apps where you can just push a button on your smartphone and access some of those resources. You know, those are great. Those are a way for people to easily get at that, but also a way for people to report behavior that might be concerning to them. And just kind of expanding on that area of technology, some states have things like, you know, okay to say or safe to help apps for students, where they can anonymously provide a tip or something related to bullying to some concern about somebody who might be showing behaviors that Steve talked about. And then finally, also, Steve talked about this, you know, how important training and operational exercises are, so that you drill this and everybody knows and they keep doing it so that they don't get it wrong when it's time. Not that you just get it right the first time, but that you don't get it wrong and that you use those drills and operational exercises. And then you document that so you can improve your processes and get people to eliminate much more of that fear level, so that when the situation does occur, you know, they're going to act like you want them to act, right? Perform. And then we'll talk more about the technology in just a moment around the assess, locate, act, and analyze framework again. I think your post-action improvements are a lot about those same things you talk about in your planning and preparation. You use the data from the incident to review, update, and adjust. You can make it better, right? We learn when we make it better, so hopefully we never have to do it again. And thinking of that act step, I know, or what I just showed, why is it that we know what to do? Remember that hybrid workforce slide. Are we back in the office or remote? Are we traveling? Are we in the field? Knowing what to do comes in many colors. If you'll kind of allow me here, let's just look at the basics of communications. And again, Sean, in a moment here, we'll be showing you some heavier duty technology. But in critical events, how do you know and get your employees to know what to do? Going back to part one of the series, Steve told us, by converting your company culturally, slowly making that change, the people, everyone has shared obligation in our safety and survival with this sort of problem, Steve told us. Well, that does not happen magically, and it does not happen with training alone. The key here is to also leverage technology to get your people to adopt a culture of preparedness. When we look at a typical enterprise, we can see that there is effectively a communication spectrum operating across the business. There's a huge variety of communications needing to be sent, read, and potentially acted upon. They range from being critical, you know, seeing here on the left, meaning something I need to read immediately, meaning it's a matter of life safety, and on down to more operational communications. Steve did a deep dive on this topic, but you can begin to imagine how even this sort of technology can help prepare an organization for such things. And even while they're getting routine messaging across their devices. Okay, so we'll spend a bit of time on this slide. So let's get into just how technology helps here. When we think about that framework, how can we use technology to help us in the moment of assess? And we think of assess as what is happening, where is it happening, and those kinds of things. So to get strong multi-category risk intelligence that's vetted, information like where it is, when it is, what's happening, that a professional is provided, that that's the information to you. That's a key process of this assess program. Many organizations have links to law enforcement, where we're aware of a number of teams who have in their command center the law enforcement connections from their CAD systems or computer aided dispatch, and it's coming right into the corporate command center, and they know what's going on in the town or where they're operating, or even more broadly, multiple towns and where they're operating. There are a lot of technology tools out there, things like Nixle, that can give you that insight into local law enforcement intelligence. So it's very up to the moment in what's going on. We think social media is another great enhancement to risk intelligence. This could include things that are specific to the community you're in, or it could include things like your company name or school name or names of individuals if you're in certain industries that tend to be targets of activism. And petroleum is one of those. Pharmaceuticals is another one. Those are things where you might even have a keyword search going on, and sometimes your executives are targeted. So having that source of intelligence is also helpful. Many mobile apps out there have SOS buttons on them, and that information can go right back into your command center so that if something is happening, you can quickly get a geolocated alert into your command center and security team so they can start into taking action. And that's really a great augmentation. These traditional panic buttons under the desk, the red buttons on the wall, those are always going to be great as well, but you should have those integrated into a single place so there aren't multiple signals coming in necessarily into multiple systems. Shot detection systems are a great way to understand where something's happening, that it's happened, and they're quick and they're very reliable. And then finally, E911 systems will help us understand, in a large building or a large campus, where might an emergency be taking place? What floor? It's really important to know on a 30, 40, 80 plus story building in New York or Chicago or wherever, not only what floor something is taking place, but what part or what section or what office on that floor. And if someone's calling in, we need to be able to direct first responders, and you're going to need a technology like that. And then another source that could help you prevent or identify very quickly are weapons detection systems. A lot of camera systems are starting to include this, or facial recognition. If you have someone who has exhibited some behaviors before that might be somebody who you put into a list, for example, showing up at perhaps a place at your work site that they're not supposed to be, and might be an indication that there's something about to happen. Okay, that's the first part, which is assess. The second part is locate. So where are the locations of police, fire, EMS? That information that you can use technology to have at your fingertips. You shouldn't have to go look for that information or do a search if you can't get it within about 30 seconds. Also, hospital and trauma centers, that's probably too complicated. So we really encourage you to have this information. And you can use technology to do that in a system like critical event management systems. Public and traffic cameras are a known great source. Not just your own cameras, right? These are cameras that might be in public places. Traffic cameras might also give you a little bit of insight on what's happening as it's unfolding. There are often, again, outside of your perimeter. And you often need to know what's happening with suppliers and distribution partners. Sometimes these are co-located with your facility, and there's in some ways a part of your operations. But if something's happening there, they can spill over into your own organization super quick. You really need to know about that, and of course your own footprint. So where do we have buildings? Where do we have other assets that we need to protect? Parts of, not just an office, but maybe data centers and distribution warehouses. each of those have locations and need to have emergency points of contact. And that could be local law enforcement. Local information should be all tied to those records that you should already have in your technology. We talked about the challenge of the mobile workforce. So if I've decided that I'm going to book an Airbnb in Aruba and I'm going to work there for a month, which sounds great, again, in a few months, maybe about 4 or 5 months from now, again, um, how does my organization know I'm there? You need to give people an easy way to share their location. You could do that with a mobile app. You could tie into your reservation systems. You could ask them to manually do it in some sort of travel system, and we probably have those systems in place. But we think it's important that you give employees the ability to self-serve and to set an expectation that they update their own information, their contact information, where they are. And you can expose that through a portal like where they can just type in that they're going to be doing some consulting at a certain fertilizing manufacturing, for example, a manufacturing plant in, for example, Beatrice, Nebraska. Someone else might be doing field repair work at an oil refinery in Dickinson, North Dakota, or working at a 6-week retail entertainment expansion in Ames, Iowa. So make it easy for people. There are lots of great technology to self-serve the input that information is, and it's likely to track. So I did talk about travel, but dynamic location is really important. There are a lot of systems out there available to organizations that help tie these things together to automatically show the likely location of a person, so that when you do need to account for them, they're more likely to know where they are and be accurate in our mustering or 100% employee accounting requirements. You should also have floor plans, campus plans at your fingertips. And if you have cameras, you can be more quickly locate what's going on. You may even be able to share that. Ideally, you could share those links with local law enforcement if they need to help you with this. And then finally, visitor management, right? It's not only important where your employees are, but where you may have people within your building, visitors in your building, and you're going to have a duty of care to them too. So understanding what you have and have others there and where they are, who they are visiting, account for them. That's really key. And so you need a visitor management system to do that. The next part of this is around ACT. So we've understood now that something is happening. We've located our resources. We need to take action. So we think that a templated system is best to automate as much of this as possible, but be able to assign and communicate very quickly with not just your own organization, but other key stakeholders is critical. So this includes things like tasks that you assign people to do, that they don't have to go and get that book or find that SOP on SharePoint. That just automatically happens. They're assigned that task and they get a notification that they're supposed to do that and they're off on their way. You need to have a very specific audience communications, and you can have templated responses for all of these. You need to notify law enforcement, likely your own leadership, the people who are affected, security teams. There could be a lot of other stakeholders, including the general public. But with as much of this as possible, you're going to want to look to automate. And we also know that what we say to people is important. Each audience needs a specific communication, but how we say it, what method we use to reach them is very important. And we have a lot of different modalities, as we call them, that can include things like text, voice, mobile notification push, taking over a desktop screen, putting a ticker on a monitor, in a public place, automatically announcing over loudspeakers. These are all capabilities that you should consider. Mustering forms, another great one. Making sure that these are all in a place that's technology enabled. not a manual checklist of people, right? But something that can be pushed out to somebody, and you can go through the current list. And so moving on, incident and responder chat. So how can we chat between all those people, all those groups that may have responsibility for our response to this particular incident? And ideally mobile enabled, so that you can get information from the field in your command center. And very important that we drill this, as we said. And a lot of software out there, including Everbridge, has drill or exercise mode so that you can go and get not just your team practicing this, but the people who might be affected, your broader employee base. And you're trying to protect them, and they can practice this as well. We do also have bidirectional communication requirements in many organizations so that you can achieve 100% accounting. Something's happening, and we need to make sure we've accounted for 100% of our employees, and many organizations have that. And then a couple more. You need to have an active shooter situation. We want to be able to enable or disable doors and their access control. Perhaps we can even release fire doors so that they're not in the line of sight to an active shooter. There may be physical barriers that we could have to get through to go to a different part of the building or a different section of campus. So really important in a lockdown that you can enable all these things. And then finally, of course, I think it's probably important. Everyone has camera systems that you can control also and record so that you can have evidence later on. And then the final step is really around analyze. Like, how did our team do? How did our employees do? We asked them to do certain things. We asked our stakeholders to complete certain tasks. What did our communication look like? Did we get 100% accounting for the employees that we were looking for? Did we get the communication we were expecting? And then using that, as we said in the cycle, to help us get better over time. So these are all different key elements for an enablement technology that are out there. It's great, but you've got to practice with it. But first, you have to have it in place, right? So Sean is going to show you now some examples of assess, locate, and act, and analyze in action, and then how we can use technology again to help prepare and respond to, and then do some post-action analysis. And then after that, we will take some questions, but here's the demo, and then we'll also move to some recommended resources and some Q&A. But back to the demo. Sean?
Awesome, thanks, Matt. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared here, and we'll get rocking and rolling. I am going to turn my camera off, but I did want everyone on the call to be able to put a name and a face together as we go through this. Once we start to do a Q&A session, I'll be sure to turn my camera back on, but I don't want to make everyone look at the side of my head here for the next little while. I want you to be able to concentrate on the technology that we're putting out there right now. So with that said, I've brought up our visual command center here. What we're going to do is actually walk through a couple different options on how organizations can interact with during an active shooter situation. I understand that everyone on this call is probably at a different point in their technology journey, and what their maturity for handling a critical event really looks like. Not every organization has the same standard operating procedures, the same footprint, the same tools available to them. And so what we need to be able to do is kind of create a solution that allows for organizations to either kind of jump in midstream, start from the beginning, or if they're ready to do absolutely everything and have a fully staffed team, to be able to really utilize all of that expertise that they've hired out. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. The way that we're going to launch this off is I'm actually going to use our mobile device in order to do so. So, hey Siri, active shooter. And so the way that this is going to happen is now that I've prompted that, we're actually going to see that come up as an SOS directly on my mobile device. I'm not going to make you wait the full 10 seconds. I'll hit the SOS now button. Now, the way that I've decided to launch this particular interaction was again through the Everbridge mobile app. It's by no means the only way that we'll see these types of situations kick off. We could also see things like connecting to shooter detection systems or Eagle Eye. We could have physical panic buttons that individuals could actually hit. There are a multitude of different ways that we start to see this data start to pour in, right? Whether that be through a completely automated method or if it's actually coming from employee to employer, allowing for that style of communication to actually take place. So whatever it is, however we're going to start to ingest that data, we need to have the ability to say, all right, this is what we're seeing, this is what's actually taking place. And so what we'll end up doing here is I'll actually end up closing that out. And what we'll see is that I'll open up my a couple different options for us. I'm going to open up my text messages, and we'll see that there's been an active shooter reported. An active shooter has been reported in your area. Please notify the safety team of your current status. So this is going back to the thing Matt talked about just a moment ago, is enabling that two-way communication between the employee and the employer. You can see here we've got an alert at the top that just disappeared, letting us know that, hey, someone's hit this button. We now have a safety alert that's been reported. Now, in this case, I can come in and I can actually just respond with a number back, right? I'm going to say, I'm trapped, but I'm uninjured, right? So that's going to start to help inform our security team, our communications team, our HR team, whoever's responsible for keeping safety of those particular employees, what the current situation is on the ground. But you can see that this message was very specific to me in my situation. And so what we need to be able to do is make sure that we have a system that allows for us to send out a bulk message depending on what the situation actually is for that individual. Where are they in relation to the event? So when an active shooter occurs, there's kind of three buckets that we see things fall into. There can sometimes be 4 or 5 depending on the maturity of the program, but the main three are I need to tell one message to the people that are in the building, one message to the people that are in the area, and then I want to activate a crisis management hotline, probably for my senior management team, for my crisis response team, to interact on what's actually taking place. So when I launched that SOS, right, that active shooter, I went ahead and pushed out 3 separate communications. And if I click on one, you'll see what that message actually looks like. An active assailant has been reported in the building, please take cover. Right, so letting us know that, hey, these 3 different things need to be reported. And so we can very quickly push those things out and say, all right, this is what we need to do based on where you are, right? And that information might come from, in some cases, a scheduling tool, the mobile app giving us an updated location. It might come from travel itineraries or travel data, or it could be coming from badge access. All of those are different points that we can start to pull in and say, all right, this is the current landscape of the situation and who is where. Now, in addition to that, I might have a slightly different message for those individuals and how we communicate to them, right? If you're in the building, it's probably not great for me to ring your cell phone. It's probably not great for me to make any type of audible messages. So ways that we might decide to communicate out with people might be a little bit different. And so what we'll do is actually use different modalities to communicate out with those individuals. So one of the ways might be to communicate via Slack. As you can see here, I sent this message directly to myself via Slack. I might also say, you know what, I want to go ahead and communicate out with people via a desktop takeover, via a screen, and that's going to be an option as well. So I'm going to switch screens here real quick. So you can see my laptop screen actually was fully taken over by an active assailant message. So I can now say, all right, based on where you are, based on the situation, based on the type of device that I want to really communicate with, whether it be an individual or a digital signage or something like that, what do I need to present and what message do I need to tell people? So having a platform that can create that level of flexibility and be that agile in how we respond is crucial when it comes to an active assailant. So I'm going to pivot back over here to the other screen, and we're going to talk about a couple other options, some of which Matt already hit on, regarding the specific ways that we can communicate on and the different things that we can leverage technology to achieve. So we come back over to our visual command center. We'll see that I have a global footprint of my offices here, everything from APAC into EMEA and South America and into the US, right? We have all these different offices. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to zoom in because I know where I'm at here. I'll turn on my alerts and we'll see that I have that mobile safety alert that just occurred and who launched it, right? So in this case, it was an SOS, again, that active shooter. I can see which office has been impacted, which employees have been impacted. I'm going to pull up that office and I'm going to look at the floor plan. show me where this event took place. So here's my employee and where their office was, and here's where that safety alert actually came from. So very quickly can understand, all right, these are the things that I need to pay attention to and the different things that we have there. So I'm going to pull that floor plan back up. Let's break it a little bit brighter, and we'll see exactly where that is. All right, well, one of the other components that Matt mentioned that we want to go ahead and make sure that we can visualize. Well, one of those, what happened to be cameras. So with traffic cameras, we can see that there's actually a camera at the entrance to this parking lot for our office. Do we need to have a bolo and see, all right, is this individual on the move if the cops started to arrive? Because I might not be in that office. I might be managing my GSOC from a different location. I might be working from home that particular day. And I still want to be able to say, all right, I've got eyes on this. Now, this is, again, a publicly facing camera. You might have other cameras that are internal to your network that you want to be able to populate in this tool as well. That's totally fine. But either way, finding ways to add context to the situation and be able to share that information up and down the organization is going to be vital during a response to an active shooter. Other options that we might want to be thinking about in terms of things that we need to know and things that we want to communicate with the organization are going to be those different areas of hospitals and emergency response and those different areas that we want to communicate out with all those different groups at any given time. So here we can see within our context feed, we have a variety of different things that we want to share and show those individuals. So the first here will be hospitals. If I scroll out, there's not a hospital right next to this particular office. I'm going to turn off our traffic cameras, and we'll see that the closest hospital is going to be Emory-Johns Creek. So very quickly, if I need to direct individuals that before the cops get there, get someone to this particular location, I can now send them in that particular way. Emergency response, where's the closest police department? It's probably the Duluth Police Department, just a little ways away. I can even draw a distance between those two things, right? It's going to be the way that the crow flies, but it's about 3.5 miles. So very quickly assess all those different components, and I can even come in and say, you know what, let's clear that out. What is the actual phone number to that particular location if I'm not going to dial 911, or what is the station website that I need for that particular location? So very quickly being able to assess what's impacted, where it's taking place, who's impacted, get that message out are going to be vital components of what we need to do and what we can do with technology. The last piece that I want to talk about here, and I wanted to make sure that I left enough time for questions, was it can go beyond just an informational push. What we've talked about so far is really just saying, hey, this thing has happened. I need you to know about it, regardless of where you are. And depending on where you are, you might get a slightly different message. As we saw, I responded back with my current situation. But there are going to be other times that I need to activate a wider swath of individuals in order to respond to a situation, in order to mitigate the risk and the business disruption our organization is going to face. So in that case, I might want to launch a critical event and say, all right, these are the things that we need to do in order to respond to it. So I'm going to just name this our active shooter, and I'm going to say that this is crime that we're going to have here. And when I launch that, what we'll end up doing is saying, all right, what are the things that I want to do as a part of that particular process? Oops, sorry, I made the wrong selection there. Let's try that one more time. And so we'll launch this event, and I'm just going to quickly name it again. And helps if I can type. Now, you could have automatically launched this the moment that an individual hits that button. We can actually say, all right, when this button gets launched or when we have a signal coming from a shooter detection system, automatically go to this scale of an event, which is absolutely fine. But I wanted us to be able to talk about kind of the different levels of response that we might see. So when I kicked off this particular communication, you can see that it automatically launched a notification. Right, that first thing that we did where we saw that scenario come through and we said, all right, these are the different things, these are the different options. You can see my phone is ringing again. So the moment that we actually launched this critical event, it starts to communicate out with me. So again, about automating that process as much as possible. Here you can see it's got some slightly different verbiage, but still relating back to that active shooter. Well, going beyond incident communications, I might have different things that I need people to do, right? I need to create an incident brief. I need to launch a shelter in place. I need to have a unified command meeting. And when I launch that, it's going to have different steps and different things that we need to do. And it's going to rally different people based on where the event has occurred. So when the event has occurred, they're now going to receive these communications and say, hey, I need you to work on these particular things, and all of those are going to be available to them on their mobile device. So whether they be working on an iPad or if they're a digital nomad and all over the place, all of those are different things that they can start to work on and actually say, all right, these are the things that we need to do. And each one of them, they can mark off, they can say needs attention, done, they can attach documents to it, they can attach photos to it. So even if we take this outside of an active shooter situation, there are going to be different ways that we can deploy this and utilize technology, again, to mitigate risk and keep people safe. I know that was a lot of information in just about, I think, about 13 or so minutes, but I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to engage with the audience and see if there are any questions out there. And I'm happy to go deeper into any piece of the product if someone has a question specific to that. So let me go ahead and I'll stop or I'll at least pause my screen share. I'll turn my camera back on and I'll see if there are any questions.
Great. Thanks, guys. Just putting my camera on here. We do have a couple questions here that we should try and get through. First one here is, do you have organizations that have rolled out the app to all their employees, and how did they introduce it into the culture?
That's a great question. So some of it can be, how do I put this in the most politically correct way? Some of it can be a little heavy-handed, right? If you're an organization that provides cell phones, provides its, all those corporate devices, effectively those organizations have said, I'm providing you with this. It's going to have that particular app on it, and we'll integrate with a mobile device management system, whether that be Intune or AirWatch or any one of those different things out there. Everbridge is pretty agnostic when it comes to the deployment of that. And they're just going to say, hey, we're trying to keep you safe. This is a part of that protocol. Other organizations where it's more BYOD, bring your own device, it does require a bit more of a tactical and strategic conversation with employees. And to me, it's really about educating the employee in how we're collecting data from them and when we're collecting data from them. I think a lot of people's initial reactions is, my employee or my employer wants to track me 24/7. Okay, well, the first hurdle in overcoming that is explaining to employees when Everbridge, and by Everbridge, I mean the customer, is also collecting that data. Everbridge is not a breadcrumbing company. We are not simply saying, oh, this is where Sean is now, this is where Sean is going in a little bit, this is where he was, right? I'm not going to know, no offense, I'm going to pick on Matt here, I'm not going to know that Matt decided to leave at 4:30 to go to the driving range, right? That's not how the situation occurs. We only share it when the employee decides to opt in. There is no way for an organization to force automatic location updates onto an employee, right? It has to be an opt-in process, and it's about communicating that out with them and saying, all right, this is when we use it, this is how we use it, and I think you really see a bigger adoption with organizations when you have that good style of communication. And our best practices and our customer success team can share those best practices so that you can get that fully engaged. Absolutely, it's certainly a long conversation.
Thank you, Sean. The next question, a lot coming in here. Let me see. Is there any guidance available for integration of Siri with Everbridge?
Sorry, what was I heard Siri and Everbridge. What was the first part that you said?
Is there any guidance available for integration with Siri and Everbridge?
Yeah, so we can, so Siri, obviously, if you go into the Everbridge app and within your safety settings, you can actually hit the add to Siri button and use some of the shortcuts that are a part of it. What I have found is that that's best deployed in most cases at a slightly higher level among the security team, at least to start off with, because you don't want false flags coming up and things like that saying, hey, this event is actually not real. We need to do something to correct that. So what we say is, let's start with a security team and engage with them and find the use cases that make sense for them to deploy, and then we'll push it downwards, right? Because you can use your Apple Watch, it doesn't matter, you can use an Android device in order to do all those different things and actually push that out. But where it makes sense the most often is to say, we're going to lock down a facility, we want a facility manager, we want a security manager in this particular area to launch those specific components. And when they do that, we use interactive thresholds to target the right group of people with that message, right? And that might not be everybody at the same time. It might, again, start at a high level and allow for that message to push down through escalation or through some type of geography requirements, the translation or different things like that. But yeah, usually starts high and goes low.
Great, Thank you. Next question is, how are data points such as first responder information or hospital locations vetted/validated to ensure that the information is up to date?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with a couple different organizations to make sure that that information stays as up to date as possible. So with COVID, that changed a little bit because of occupancy levels in hospitals, as depressing as that comment might be. We started to bring in some of that data as well that was going to be populated via COVID, but we actually have a couple different partners that we leverage for emergency response and then hospitals as well. Those are actually two separate partners that we bring in. If there is ever, if this is an Everbridge customer that's bringing this up, if there's ever a discrepancy, if you found something that appears to be out of date, if a hospital is moved, changed hours, changed specialties, it's no longer emergency response or a trauma one center, whatever those situations are, please reach out to us. Please reach out to your account manager, your customer success representative, and we're happy to update that. We can update them manually, but we generally rely on a partner that sends stuff usually once a quarter to get those things updated.
Great, thank you. Next question is, I saw you displayed a floor plan. Does it show the exact location of the employee on the floor after they've submitted that alert?
Exact is probably, I will caution with that statement, right? I know exact could probably mean things to different individuals. Exact when it comes to me launching the SOS that you saw that do, that's generally, the numbers are about 95% of those launches happen within 50 feet accuracy of where it actually occurred. Now, if you are in, I think Matt brought it up. If I'm on the 13th floor of a 58-story building, there is some geo shadowing that can occur, right? Because the system, the satellites don't actually know exactly where you are. So that one might be a little bit closer to 150 feet, but I think it's 99.9% fall within that 150-foot range. So they're pretty accurate. When it comes to, we saw my little icon, it was a yellow icon of an individual. We can physically drop them exactly where they are. And that can also be dependent on where they're badged into. So if I'm going to pick on Matt again, if Matt has badged into the north wing of an office or the west wing, or he's moved floors or different things like that, we can show that through connecting to things like Secure or Linnell or S2 or whatever it is, and say, all right, this is specifically where Matt has badged into. So it can be extremely accurate with that up-to-date location information.
Just to build on that too, the context of that location accuracy that I was talking about earlier too was kind of in the context of E911 technology too. So the notion of dispatchable location, which is a clinical term in E911 technology that says with the E911 call, if that technology is deployed, that call will have a packet of information that shows exactly where that device is and the location of it. So it's not like a geolocation thing that we kind of know about, but that packet of information does go with that 911 call.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, Matt. And we're starting to see increase in regulations and requirements of organizations start to get up to speed on that. So yeah, if it's not coming from the SOS and it's actually coming from your voice over IP or your actual landline at your desk, yeah, to Matt's point, we'll see exactly where it is.
Great. So I think we only have time for one more question. So last question here is, can any feed be fed into the VCC that you showed?
The marketing part of me would say yes. The technology part of me would say, can we define any? So I would say that generally the answer to that question is actually yes. So if there is an API feed, we can ingest it. In some cases, we do it in different ways. I was working with another organization that was really concerned about air quality. A lot of their employees work outside, and they wanted an update on air quality, and they were going to say, if it's this particular level, you have to come in and take breaks every so often, all those different things. That one was actually updated through a KML. So it wasn't an API feed, but usually the information is out there. How we decide to bring it into Everbridge is kind of dependent on what that use case ends up being. But yeah, if that particular individual who asked that question wants to reach out to their sales rep or their sales engineer, we can certainly scope that out. There have only been very few times where we haven't been able to do it, and I'll say almost every one of those times it was not an issue on the Everbridge side. It was usually that there was a lack of APIs that were available on that source feed side.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for all of your insights today, Matt and Sean. Sadly, we are approaching the end of the session here, but as a reminder, if we were not able to get to your question, and there was a lot of them, we will have someone follow up with you directly. The session was also being recorded, and the slides and the on-demand video will be available within 24 hours. We'll send you guys an email. I also wanted to remind everyone to register for part 3 of the webinar series. It will take place next week, August 23rd, and we'll be hearing from Eric Alpertz, who was on the front line of the Pulse nightclub shooting. The registration page will be found on the Everbridge website, and the link will also be emailed to you within 24 hours with all the on-demand slides from this webinar as well. All right, so with that, I want to give a big thanks to our speakers, Matt and Sean, and thank you to our audience for taking time out of your busy day to join us, and we hope that you will join us for the rest of the series. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.